The flood situation in Assam continues to threaten life and property, with around 40 lakh people estimated to be affected by the floods in 27 of the state's 33 districts. According to the Assam State Disaster Management Authority, the inundation has so far claimed the lives of over 80 people. The state's wildlife sanctuaries, including the Kaziranga National Park, have also been severely hit, where over 75 animals have died, while over 120 others have been rescued. Over 3,000 villages are currently inundated, and 1.3 lakh hectares worth of crops are estimated to have been damaged. The flood situation is not limited to Assam alone. Several other parts of the country have witnessed flooding as well. What's worse is that it's not a one-off phenomenon, but an annual affair. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Assam floods. Joining me on the program today are R.R. Rashmi, Program Director, Earth Sciences and Climate Change, TERI; Professor C.K. Varshney, environmentalist and former Dean, School of Environmental Sciences, JNU; and K.T. Ravindran, urban planner. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Rashmi, let me begin the program with you first. Let's analyze the flood situation in Assam. What's the worst thing about the floods in Assam is that, it's not a one-off instance. It's an annual affair. It keeps happening every year. There is a loss to life, both humans and wildlife. There is a loss of property, fields and everything else. And it's almost like the entire state is affected as a result of this. What is the underlying problem, really?
Frank, the floods in Assam are a recurrent problem. This happens every year, and every year it causes such devastation on such a large scale. It's really mind-boggling and really painful to see that we fail again and again every single year. What we need to understand is that we cannot blame the nature only for this kind of state of affairs. It is primarily an anthropogenic problem, a problem which is compounded by the human and socio-economic factors in this region. Brahmaputra is one of the largest river systems in the world, and Assam has been home to this river system for millions of years. I don't know how many. The entire floodplains of Assam, they have received these floods since time immemorial. So these are natural floodplains. But what is happening in the last few decades is that we are encroaching into the river flood plains and building embankments, encroaching into these areas where we should not have set up human habitations. These are socio-economic problems. One cannot discount the fact that with the increase in population, we need to bring larger areas under cultivation and human habitation. But there are rules which we need to respect, and we are not respecting those rules. Essentially, the problem is that we are getting into the river flood plains where we should not be there. And we are causing constructions, we are obstructing the natural flow of water in the flood areas, and therefore it is causing floods at a scale which is unimaginable now. It is not that it is something which is not known to us. The climatic patterns, the precipitation patterns are all known to us. There is nothing extraordinarily new about it. But what is new is that without any planning, we have got into these river flood plains and caused destruction to ourselves, also to the natural wildlife. So the problem is that we need to evolve a good policy for water management in these flood plain areas. We need to have flood zone regulations. We need to ensure that the wildlife is fully protected, their corridors are not affected. We need to also get into flood moderation projects in the upper catchment areas. There are projects which are being built, but we need to coordinate the water releases as per need and as per the timings of these floods. There is absolutely no coordination in these two agencies in the upper catchment areas and in the utilization areas. So these three things we need to combine to be able to address these problems effectively.
Absolutely. All right. So, Professor Vashni, let me bring you into the picture now. Let's analyze the environmental aspects really of flooding. It's not just limited to Assam. It happens across the country. It's a year-round, it's a yearly phenomenon really, and we see this happening every year. But Assam in particular gets affected the most. We've seen floods in Chennai. We've seen floods in Kerala, but they are not as recurrent as the ones that we see in Assam.
No, I tell you, Assam represents a very special situation. First of all, we must understand that from the climate point of view, Assam has a climate which is of rainforest type. That is, rainfall is predominant there. And secondly, what happens is that Assam has been practicing jhum cultivation for a long time, which means the burning of the vegetation, which really removes the protection from the rain and the soil comes. So I think that with every flush of rain, there is a large amount of soil which and the dead material of the plants which really flow into the river basin. And you must understand that there are many number of tributaries which bring large amount of water from Arunachal as well as from Barak Valley. And the Barak River itself is a very major river will bring. So I think these rivers are very rich in silt. And because of the silt, the water really cuts the river margins, and it really gets the momentum which creates a problem, and the river floodplain and as well as river itself gets very much deposited. The whole amount of silt gets deposited, and therefore it becomes progressively shallow. As it becomes progressively shallow, and at the same time the climate is changing and the rainfall pattern is also changing, because incessant rain for short period is now a very big norm. And the climate model also suggests that in Assam, we are going to have more rains than what we used to have. So first of all, Assam has a huge amount of rain. And secondly, because of the climate change, it is going to really increase further. I will tell you that on June 25th, it is the first flush of the flood which came. And it was quite serious. And therefore, every year we find that there are 3 or 4 flushes of the rainfall, which really brings and renews the flood situation entire during the monsoon season. There is one more thing is there, that large number of people which really migrated there have occupied the wetlands. And these wetlands are very important. In fact, floods in Assam is very important, but it brings the fertile silt to the field, and that gives the fertility to the... In fact, even the Kaziranga National Park also needs flooding. But the excessive flooding that is taking place is a cause of great worry. I can tell you that on 25th, on that day, the rainfall was about 29 times more for that day. And therefore, the water carrying capacity of the river and of the tributaries gets very much reduced. And there has been large number of programs for desilting these, but somehow they have not been operational so far. So I think there are factors. Moreover, the dams that we have built on the Brahmaputra as well as its tributaries, I think they are also become contributory factor of discharging huge water during the rainfall, because they cannot sustain so much of hydrostatic pressure. So for their safety, a large amount of water is released. And as a result, the whole thing becomes very complex. More than that, the COVID-19 has created further problem of rescue as well as safety of the people.
Sure. Okay. So we've discussed several aspects now. I'd like to take up a few more things with you a little later on in the program, Professor, about why flooding in limited quantity is required really for agriculture and the Kaziranga National Park as well. I'll come to that in a bit. But before that, Mr. Ravindran, it's not just the agricultural land. It's not just, the forests, but it is also urban cities that are flooding. And how do we deal with that too? Because, it's not just limited to certain areas or certain regions, but the entire state seems to be in a problem, in a fix, in soup, if you could call it that. And even the cities too are suffering.
So while the point that you raised about the cities is a very specific problem, I'd like to start from the larger picture to the smaller picture. And the larger picture is that under the conditions of climate change, the periodicity of the flood is going to reduce and the intensity of the flood is going to increase. Because this Brahmaputra river, which is a humongous river, it's scary to look at it, it's that big, that starts from Tibet. And in the Tibetan plateau where it begins, the temperature is rising every decade by 0.42%. That means there's an increased melting of ice and there's going to be larger flow of water into the downstream. And Assam is where the downstream is located. In Assam itself, if you look at the movement of the river, it's from the north to south. Towards the south, geographically speaking, when it comes to Gopalpara area, it turns in 90 degrees. And that turn is causing a larger spread at that location. That's where we are now having the maximum number of red alerts happening. The river coming in from Arunachal also comes and joins the mainstream in Brahmaputra at that point. So there is an added flood condition there, and this is going to increase over a period of time. So one has to view the problem of flooding, whether it is in cities or in agriculture or in the reserved forest areas. We have to view it from this larger perspective, that the problem is not going away, but the problem is going to be more and more aggravated. So therefore, a solution has to be found in which one factors in this increased flooding, increased quantum of flooding, and increased silting, as well as reduced periodicity of the flood. So from this perspective, if you look at it, next I'd like to deal with the infrastructure in the area. Infrastructure means there is major highway that's passing through, almost parallel to the river, connecting all the major cities, including Guwahati and all those cities, almost along the parallel to the river. Now, there is also a railway line that goes up laterally towards north. Now, these are constructions which actually hinder the movement of water. Both it acts as a bunt for reducing the amount of water flow into the inland areas, but at the same time it prevents the outflow of water from the inland areas to the river. So the localized rainfall-based flooding also increases. Water retention increases. That's actually one of the problems in Kaziranga area. So there are these infrastructure-related issues that need to be looked at, whether they have been designed simply for the efficiency of the road network, or have they also been factoring in the flow of water across the linear system of movement. That's one issue. The second most important issue is that almost all the power stations, power generation points are somehow or the other connected to the water system, because they draw water from the river to cool down the equipment and pump back the hot water into the river. So they are invariably located along the water. So when a flood comes in, this whole electrical infrastructure actually breaks down because all the power stations are flooded, and subsequently you don't have hospitals functioning, you don't have water supply functioning, you don't have a whole lot of connected problems arise apart from just provision of electricity. So an entire gamut of infrastructure is impacted by the flooding because of this location of power stations along the way. Now, this is aggravated even more when it comes to cities. For instance, if you look at Guwahati, I was once in Guwahati when the flood was on, there was no road in Guwahati. There was just one humongous river in which my hotel was also sticking out of the water. It was so completely inundated. So this is a situation that happens in cities because they're built quite close to this. So the third issue, the third level issue is the issue of rehabilitation. And we need to look at rehabilitation more comprehensively from the larger perspective of both the climate change and the infrastructure impacts that the flooding has.
Okay. All right. Let me take the discussion forward now. We've spent quite a bit of time on our opening remarks, so I'm going to ask my panelists to be brief going forward. Mr. Rashmi, let's talk about the use of technology now. We understand that this is a prevalent issue. It happens every year. We all know that, what's going to come. So can we use technology to try and ensure that we can bring about some kind of solution to this problem?
Yes. In fact, there have been many attempts at this to find appropriate technological solutions to this problem. In fact, in 2016 itself, when the Prime Minister visited Guwahati after the floods, he had set up a high-level committee to look at the integrated flood management, evolve a flood management plan for the area, for the entire Brahmaputra region. And that there was an expert committee which came up with a report, and that committee is headed by the Deputy Chairman of the Niti Aayog. So that work is going on. But what is actually becoming more and more evident, the experts are all saying that what is happening is that the intensity of the floods is going to increase, the climate variability is going to increase. So within a short period, you will have very large quantum of water flowing into the region, and therefore you will have increased floods, maybe for a very short period of time, very large quantum of water affecting the region. But this is a problem which we will have to live with. We can do nothing about the climatic changes from a regional perspective. It's a global problem, and we are all trying to address this global problem at a different level. But we will have to live with this problem of increased frequency, higher intensity of floods. But what is possible is that we can perhaps predict the intensity and scale of these floods with appropriate meteorological planning and the instruments available at our disposal. We can do a good forecasting, and a forecasting model we have evolved in TERI, where we are actually currently helping the state government of Assam in evolving a flood forecasting model for the town of Guwahati. If the precipitation increases, given the climate variability, what is it that is going to happen? Which are the vulnerable areas in the city which are going to be impacted? We are doing a modeling for this. So we can help them come up with a plan for good forecasting, and that is possible. The IMD is already working on this. So this is one area which the state can enable the state government to come up with a solution. But it can only be a warning system. It can be an early warning system which can help the people move away from the danger zones. But we cannot remove the danger itself unless we do two other things. As I said in the beginning, one is that we need to have good regulation for the management of the floodplains. In the entire Brahmaputra, it's a riverine ecosystem. You need water for that. You need floods in that region. So all that you have to do is to ensure that the human habitations do not obstruct become an impediment to the management of this riverine ecosystem. And state governments are actually openly encouraging more and more habitations, larger area to be brought under cultivation, and they are building artificial embankments. So this is something which we will have to carefully plan. And this has to be part of our economic policy making. Everybody must realize that the short-term gains are going to compromise our long-term ecological, environmental, and social goals.
Professor, let's take a couple of aspects forward. One, of course, why are floods required really? They are a natural process, is what you suggested. It's required for the agricultural land as well as the national parks as well. Why don't you delve a little bit into that? And also, what are the kind of solutions that we need to work on going forward?
I think, Frank, we must understand that the soils in the northeast are very different. They are lateritic soils, which means that within the soil, there is very little nutrient available. The large amount of rainfall simply drives away all the nutrients. So all the nutrients are available in trees and in vegetation. And the soil is not having huge amount of nutrient as we find in Indo-Gangetic plain, where the soil is a major reservoir of the nutrients. Now, this is number one. Now, in order to maintain the productivity and the demand of this vegetation, which is very thick, we require a refreshing of the nutrient, which the river brings. So I think ecologically, the system is so balanced that the flood brings the nutrient which otherwise soil will get depleted. And then because the trees are long living, they are large and the vegetation is very thick, so nutrient requirement is very high. Now the technology you said that can be used for controlling floods. We must understand that the river, particularly the river that we have in Assam, is a tendency of changing its river course. And it changes river course at a very fast speed as compared to many other rivers, large rivers in the world. So I think it is the very nature of the river which is changing. So I think secondly, the number of tributaries that it has is also very large. And the vegetation denudation which is taking place left and right by the settlers and by illegal occupation of the wetlands and low-lying areas, which were actually the water accumulators and which provided the reservoir for the water during the summer period. And in Assam, we are finding a very interesting situation. During this period, it is flood. And during summer, the Assam is reporting water shortages of a very serious nature. So I think unless we hold this water, and the holding of this water is only possible by maintaining our wetlands. And wetlands have been used now for agriculture. Wetlands have been taken over for settlements. And this is a kind of a problem that we have. And for the urbanization and many other infrastructure development, including road network and many other things. And in fact, we have got a very aggressive policy of industrialization there. So I think we have to be very careful about it. And as Dr. Ravindran has mentioned, that when the melt is high because of the summer, it is at the same time that the monsoon breaks in the Assam. So I think two things put together creates a kind of a pulse which results into a very serious flood. So my submission is that as a solution, if we want, we have to use nature itself for its solution. That is that we have to be extra careful in really planting and regenerating the vegetation, and whatever development we are embarking upon, we should see that vegetation is protected. And secondly, we have to be very mindful of the hydrology, surface hydrology of the area. As has been mentioned, that there are large number of blocks that we have put in terms of these embankments and so on. And in the previous year, it has only been an ad hoc situation. And all these embankments are old and they are given away in a very frequently. And that is a reason that the flood is taking place. There has been large number of programs of desilting the riverbed.
Sure.
And in fact, in one case, a small portion of the river was also desilted. But these are expensive as well as they require engineering input as well as cost-wise, they are very demanding.
Time now to get a quick closing comment from you, Mr. Ravindran, with the best way forward. How do we ensure we have permanent solutions and also cost-effective solutions? Because the professor spoke about how the solutions that we have looked at so far have been ad hoc in nature and have have been very expensive. So how do we change that around?
Well, I think quite a lot of pointers came from Dr. Vashni's comments also. But I'd like to add that you cannot plan against water. You have to plan with water. That's a fundamental planning principle that needs to be followed when we talk about riverine systems. You cannot work against the water flow. You have to move with the flow of water, metaphorically speaking. So, first thing is to actually use technology, which is now currently available, and there are a lot of experts in Assam who are now trained all over India and have gone back, some of them have gone back to Assam, who are working with technologies to do proper scientific mapping. I think proper scientific mapping and a proper information base is a primary requisite for any planning forward. But what unfortunately is happening in Assam at present is, for instance, this huge, very expensive, that is, I think it is some $57 million project for dredging the river. Now, is dredging the river a real solution, a permanent full-time solution? Is this amount of money needs to be poured into the river How much of return in how many years is it going to give back to the community? These are questions which are so fundamental, which have to be asked. I'm not saying that the people who planned this have not asked these questions. Perhaps they have, but I'm very apprehensive that these are short-term solutions. Second thing is about the habitation, which have been moving closer and closer to the river because the soil is richer and richer as you come close to the river. Apart from soil, the whole Assam Valley, their culinary culture is very dependent on fish, and there's large amount of fish that's available closer to the river. So people keep moving closer and closer to the river. And this is not factored into the planning. Sometimes the master plans even include new areas without considering that these are actually wet areas or wetlands which need to be protected, which is actually functions as a sponge for containing the water and absorbing it back into the ground. And those areas are built upon, and those areas are also planned to be built upon, unfortunately. So the new scientific mapping that we do should identify areas where no activity should take place, areas where agriculture and other kind of exploitation can take place, and areas where habitations can come. This is one issue of mapping to identify the areas where you can accommodate different activities without running cross currents to the water. That's the first issue. Second thing is about the building typology itself. If you look at the kind of houses which are built or are inundated in the images that one is getting now, you can see that they're normal buildings which are built using very often temporary materials like bamboo and so on, which is prevalent in that area. But they're just ground floor structures with normal pitched roofs. And they are all almost up to the eave of the roof, they are underwater. So there is a problem with this typology. So it's obvious that these are not people who are used to living in water or in wetland areas, but they're immigrants from other locations who have come and colonized the riverbed. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building in that time. Because traditionally in areas where you have wetlands, they built stilted buildings on bamboo structures, which even if gets washed away, there's not much of a property loss, and there is also the question of infrastructure building, which is done through the state. And where are these infrastructure located? That also has to be very carefully planned. So when I say infrastructure, I'm talking about health facilities, hospitals, schools, community centers, all the social infrastructure that we're talking about, which are generally provided by the state. Now, where are these located? These are questions that need to be answered while using a more scientific method of planning.
Absolutely. Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the problem is not going to go away anytime soon. It is only going to get aggravated in the days and years to come. Floods are required and are a natural process, but excessive flooding is the problem, is what the panelists are suggesting. What is the solution? Let's talk about four or five solutions here. One, of course, is we need a better policy for water management. We need flood moderation projects. We also need to ensure that we use nature itself as a solution, protect the vegetation and rejuvenate the depleted areas with more water, is what the panelists are suggesting. Also, use scientific mapping and a good research base. You can't work against water, but you have to work with it. As the old adage goes, don't swim